All right, we are live. What's up, everyone? Marissa Roy here with Christina Lynn, and we are going to be talking to you guys today about burnout in both fitness and in life in general. So I guess to just walk us into this, I want to throw out some definitions as for what burnout is, how we're going to define it, and how we're going to kind of approach this beast of a topic. So to me, burnout is something I commonly see in clients. It's usually looks like apathy towards a goal that maybe once mattered a lot to you, but now you couldn't care less about it. And usually it occurs when someone is kind of going 110%, 150% after something for weeks or months or even years on end, and then they reach a point where maybe they're not even able to give 50% or 75% or a full 100% into that goal, that same goal that once mattered to them, because now they either still feel like they care about it, and their actions aren't lining up with it, or they are just not able to get themselves to do anything towards that goal. So burnout is something that I think I see a lot in my clients. Christina, I know you could probably add on to this, but it's something that is really frustrating to come across, because then we have to kind of hit the reset button and figure out what really is going on with that client and how we can circumvent the burnout or refresh that person or figure out a solution. So I don't know how you want to add on that.
Yeah, so I was going to say that it's definitely something that I've seen within my clients, but also something that I have experienced with personally, and I'm sure you have as well. And I think one of the things, kind of to build off what you said, is trying to figure out what the source of that burnout is and how to, I think also too, to recognize what burnout is and kind of like what the symptoms are, and then also what you can do to combat that. But I think part of burnout and something that I have experienced within my clients is, I think it's part of this mentality that we see on social media, kind of like the extreme no days off and, no rest days. And I think part of that, when people start to jump into their fitness lifestyle, they think that they're not allowed to take rest days, or they have to be training to absolute failure. And it's kind of this black and white, all or nothing kind of mindset. And I think that really contributes to burnout when it comes to fitness.
Yeah, and when you bring up social media, that just like opened up a whole nother can of worms. But like when someone is scrolling through social media and they're seeing all the people that they look up to and they follow, and maybe they're in a period where they can't, prioritize fitness as much as their favorite influencer can, but they're looking at, Fit Becky and Fit Sally, and they're going 6 days a week to the gym for 2 hours a session, and they're comparing themselves and they're saying, this is what I should be doing, when in reality they're holding themselves to a standard that it's not attainable for them in their context. And there's a lot of that contextual decision making that I want to unpack later on in the episode, but it's so important that we don't fall into that social media trap, which I'm sure could be a whole another episode. But getting back to burnout, it really just, I looked up a definition for it, and going to read it out. But burnout is technically a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress, and it occurs when you feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, or are unable to meet constant demands. And so when we're talking about burnout, we're going to talk about it in a couple of contexts. We're going to talk about it with training in the gym. We're going to talk about it with nutrition, and we're going to talk about it with total kind of holistic life load as well. So Christina, why don't you start us off by getting into the symptoms of what burnout kind of looks like in a person and what that feels like?
So symptoms are obviously going to vary from person to person, but generally speaking, symptoms can be extreme fatigue, and then on the other end, maybe sleeplessness or insomnia, maybe difficulty falling asleep. Maybe you are getting sick frequently, or you have illnesses more than normal, moodiness, or maybe feeling on edge. lack of interest in things. So maybe depression or just overall unhappiness. Maybe you're not able to concentrate or remember things, feeling very stressed or anxious. And then I think another really big symptom is like feeling busy, but not being productive or getting things done. All of those can be signs of burnout.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those first ones, especially the extreme fatigue, insomnia, and your immune system functioning kind of taking a back seat, can definitely be symptoms of more of the physical side. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're burned out from training, so I'm going to go into this now. I didn't expect to talk about this so early, but when we're talking about burnout with training, we are technically talking about non-functional and functional overreaching, which can lead into overtraining. So if you're burning out with training, chances are you're probably doing more than your body can recover from for a prolonged period of time. And so functional overreaching is abbreviated as FOR, and it is essentially a functional way where coaches will actually program in periods of time where you are overreaching beyond what you're able to recover from. So this would be in the context of an elite athlete or someone peaking for a competition, whether that's powerlifting or bodybuilding or a sport that they play in. Their functional overreaching period is going to look like them training harder, training more, running their body more into the ground than they know that they can recover from, kind of feeling like crap for a while, but that is followed by a period of deloading, rest, and essentially the theory behind that is when you run yourself into the ground that hard, you overreach, and then you recover, you're able to what's called super compensate. So kind of go beyond what your normal, 100% recovered rate is. You can kind of go beyond that and perform at your ultimate peak after that period of recovery and rest. So that's kind of the theory behind functional overreaching. But what happens is not everybody, and I would argue to say a majority of people don't have that much structure in their programming, and they will definitely just take on too much all at once, too much total stress overall on their body, on their mind. And when it comes to training, doing that for a prolonged period of time and not recovering from what you are training and what you're doing in the gym and with your activity levels, that's going to lead to a lot of these symptoms that overlap with kind of just general symptoms of burnout, but with training, especially with non-functional overreaching, those are the kinds of things that you see, especially that fatigue, that moodiness, the lack of interest, the depression, and that can lead to burnout in sport. So whether we're looking at athletes in certain physique sports, barbell sports, or traditional team sports, non-functional overreaching is essentially what leads into overtraining syndrome, which is burnout. And so when we're looking at this in athletes, we are looking at, how can we implement ways to prevent that from happening, using functional overreaching and implementing proper programming so that these people can make sure that they're using appropriate periods of rest. And so one way that I will do this with my athletes, whether they're competitors or they're just general population lifters, is implementing deload weeks. And so that's one really big thing when it comes to training that can help prevent burnout, both mentally and physically. So I'll kind of go into this and then I'll let you take it, Christina. But a deload week is essentially a week where you take some time to reduce your intensity, reduce your frequency, take it easy in the gym, and maybe even take a couple extra days off and just refresh yourself and then jump into a new training program or a new block or a new phase after that, but only after you've allowed yourself that period of extended rest.
So while you were talking, I had two thoughts. So the one thing is, I think that it might be difficult for someone who's not working with a coach. And so maybe they don't have a training program or they don't have someone that they can talk to and let them know how they're feeling. Because if, as a coach, if I had a client who was saying, I'm really stressed, I'm really sore, I'm not recovering, I don't have any interest to go into the gym, then to you and me, that might be like, okay, well, this might be a good sign that it might be time to implement a refeed or a diet break or a deload. And that's something that is, as trained professionals, we kind of notice those symptoms and can go from there. But for someone who doesn't have a coach, it might be difficult. And again, going back to that all or nothing mentality, they don't either know to implement something like that, or they think that that might be a step in the wrong direction. Because I've had clients, even when I do tell them, hey, let's take an extra rest day a week, or let's do a diet break, or let's do a deload, they feel like, well, now they're going to lose all of the momentum that they've had. Even though they're feeling all those symptoms, they feel like it's taking a step back and they're going to like either lose their gains or they're not going to make progress for that week or 2 weeks. So can you maybe go in, because I know that you're very familiar with deloads, can you maybe go into how a client would respond to something like that, to someone who maybe thinks that they're going to lose all their strength gains in a week?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you brought up a really good point with the all or nothing mentality, because like you said, most people don't have coaches. But if you're listening to this, hopefully you have had one of us as a coach, or you're considering it, or have had another good coach in the past. But yeah, most people don't have coaches. And eventually, if someone is starting, a healthier lifestyle, or they're just trying to get in shape, get into the gym, oftentimes we see that cyclical, like, I go to the gym 5 days a week for 2 weeks, and then I'm not going at all for the next 2 months. And that's kind of the cyclical thing we see with a lot of people, because they don't realize that maybe they should start with less load overall. Maybe they should start with 3 days per week at the gym. Or maybe instead of going, 7 days per week for 6 months on end and then not going ever again in their life, maybe they should have taken, a week off every couple of months in that time frame, and maybe that would have helped them to prolong their routine. But when it comes to answering that question and giving a client a deload, or telling them to do less, and telling them ways that they can keep this lifestyle as something that is sustainable for them, because that's ultimately what we want out of this, right? The reason why we want to prevent burnout, and the reason why we don't want to have to face that, is because we want to be able to do this, fitness and health for the rest of our life. And so when I do tell clients like, hey, let's take a break, let's take a deload, I usually get a lot of pushback.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure like we get a ton of pushback on that. And it's a very strange concept, because I will literally tell the client, hey, we're going to deload this week, and I'm cutting all of the weight that you're using by like 40-50%. I'm cutting a set off of every single exercise, and I'll tell them, you should be in and out of the gym in about half the time that you're normally there for. You should feel like you half-assed the workout, and you should really honestly feel like itching by the end of the week to really be back to full-on training. And if they come to me after that week and they say, I still feel tired, I still feel fatigued, everything still feels heavy, even with all these changes that you've implemented, then I will tell them, okay, go do it again for a whole nother week. Like just a 2-week deload instead of a 1-week deload. And we will do it for as long as needed until that person starts to stops exuding those symptoms. But
I would also argue that I think that it is a lot harder for women to take time off from the gym, because I just feel like we're programmed to do more. I need to do more cardio. I need to do more volume. I need to eat less. We're always looking for more. And I would say with probably 75% of my clients, pulling back and increasing their food has actually been what's been the key to their success. And so I think that we're just programmed to always do more, and so deloads are very difficult for us to take, or even just taking a step back.
Absolutely. And just like you, every single one of my clients has benefited from eating more. I don't think there's been a single person that I have started out as a client and had to decrease their food out the gate. And that is speaking for my male and female clients, people just aren't eating enough. And it's ironic because most of the time, you know, the narrative on social media is, oh, reducing calories is going to help you with losing weight, make these calorie swaps, order this. And, you know, of course we need to reduce certain things and increase other things, like reducing dietary fat, reducing carbohydrates if they're too high, and increasing protein. But most of the time that shift in macronutrients does come with an overall increase in total calories when I do implement that for someone. And so, you know, people increasing their calories, taking a step back, taking a deload week, I have more trouble with the clients who, you know, come to me doing so much because, like you said, they have that more mindset. Like they just want to keep, you know, hammering the cardio. They need to eat less. And there's ultimately fear when we come in and we say, hey, you know, you are, you know, hammering it really hard. You're not seeing the progress that you want. You've been stuck where you're at for pretty much the entire time that you've been doing this. Let's eat more food. Let's reverse diet. Let's take a deload. Let's give your body rest. And we're approached with pushback and fear to those concepts. But ultimately, those are the things that prevent burning out and quitting altogether. And those are the things that actually lead to seeing results. So yeah, I mean, I get a ton of pushback when it comes to that, but it's ultimately the most worthwhile change we can make.
And I would also argue, I feel like not only women, but I would say that clients who come to you and they have a very high stress perception. So they perceive a lot of things to be higher stress, and they maybe feel like they're not able to handle everything on their plate, and they just perceive things to be a lot more stressful, and they don't have those strategies in place to kind of reduce their stress or bring their anxiety down. So talking about a deload and maybe increasing food, your body is going to, it's a stress response to, you know, the training and the dieting. And so one of the things to implement the deload and to increase the food is to hopefully reduce cortisol. And I think that that's one of the reasons that we implement that, is to kind of give your body a break. And sometimes it's actually exactly, again, what we're talking about, what you need to be able to break through a plateau. So I think people have a misconception that taking, you know, a week or two off the gym, that they're going to lose all their gains or they're going to lose all their progress. But sometimes that actually can be exactly what you need to push past a plateau. But on the other hand, there are people who do, you know, maybe the scale goes up a little bit, but it's just very important to stay in constant communication with your coach and let them know how you feel, because we really value that biofeedback, and that's how we make adjustments as needed to your plan. So I think that you know, it's the physical rest, but we're trying to bring down that cortisol response that your body has been experiencing.
Yeah. And, you know, the mental and the physical stress that we see is so intertwined. And that's actually a really great segue to what I was actually going to say next, was just kind of conceptualizing how our bodies and minds handle stress. So when we're thinking about burnout, you know, we have to first talk about what leads up to burnout. And so, you know, we essentially are constantly undergoing different stressors, whether it's from work, whether it's from family, whether it's the training stress or the nutrition stress that we put on ourselves. But essentially, one of the theories in psychology and physiology that our bodies, you know, that we have kind of categorized for the human body and how it responds to stress is called the GAS, General Adaptation Syndrome. And essentially how it works is there's three phases. There's the alarm phase, there's resistance, and there's exhaustion. And it looks like a really steep incline for the alarm phase. The resistance phase is just a flat line going across time. And then the exhaustion is a very steep drop off. And so what this means is it kind of has to do with what Christina was saying about cortisol. But when we encounter stressors, our body goes on alert. The alarm comes on, and we immediately start to, adapt and make changes, whether it's with our mindset or with what we're doing or how we're acting or with our physiology of how we're responding to that stress so that we can accommodate it. And so that's the alarm phase. And then for however long we have to sustain that stress on our body, on our mind, that is the resistance phase, where we kind of just hold that level of stress across time for as long as we need to. And ultimately, if we reduce that stress after enduring it, maybe you study for a test, you're very stressed for that week, 2 weeks, and then you take the test and you're relieved, then that's great. And you have adapted to that stress. And the next time that you have a test, you'll know how to study for it, and that your overall alarm response to that will be a little bit lower. And that's how you adapt to stressors. That's the same way we adapt to training. So when you put your body through its first resistance training workout ever, your body's like, hey, what the heck are you doing to me? And your alarm goes off. You're basically like paralyzed for a couple of days from soreness.
Yes.
And then your body adapts, your muscles adapt, and they learn how to deal with that stressor the more and more you do that movement, you do that workout. And so that's the resistance, and that is your body adapting. Now, that's how it works in an ideal world. You deal with stressors, you adapt, and you come out better the next time, and you improve over time.
I think it's also important, sorry to cut you off, I think it's also important to talk about acute and chronic stress. Yeah. So acute stressors is kind of like the example that you gave is having a test. So you have a test and that comes up in a week and then it's gone. And that it's a short period of stress. But chronic stress would be something like maybe you hate your job and you go in to work every single day and you're doing that for months and years. That's a chronic stressor because it's something that's long term. So I think it's really good. I guess we'll go into this a little bit later, but when you're trying to pinpoint those stressors, you have to think about, is it short term or long term, and how that kind of affects, because I know that some clients, they have something that's going on for that 1 week or maybe a couple days and then it's over, versus something that they experience for a long period of time.
Yeah. And so when it comes to that alarm and resistance phase, if it's an acute stressor, like I was talking about, you have the alarm, you have the resistance, and then it's gone. And so you don't reach that exhaustion phase. But what happens with chronic stressors is you stay in that resistance phase. Let's say it's that job that you hate, that's a toxic environment, and you stay in that job for, for years or months at a time, and you're just, holding that level of chronic stress for the long term. Eventually you're going to hit a point of exhaustion. And depending on how long that chronic stress has been prolonged, that exhaustion could lead to, moderate to severe burnout. And I've seen this happen in actually some of my clients, with them, in the duration that we had worked together. One of my girls had essentially what I described, a very toxic environment. She was basically just being belittled at work, being taken advantage of, and was doing far more work than she was being paid to do, because her coworkers were just kind of guilting her or, manipulating her into it. And she dealt with that for months, and her immune system was starting to fail her by the end of that. She was getting sick every other week. She was having allergic reactions to things she had never had allergic reactions to before. And eventually she put in her 2 weeks. And since then, she's had a huge revelation, and she's been able to feel a lot of relief, but she's still dealing with those residual effects of the burnout and the exhaustion in her physiology. Her body's still trying to calm down from being at that resistance phase for such a long period of time. So yeah, it's definitely something that you want to look out for. And when you are analyzing your stress, like you said, you want to look at, is this stressor something that is acute, or is it something that's chronic? Because if it's acute, you can kind of see that light at the end of the tunnel, and you can push through and not really have to deal with, those sorts of side effects. But if you're dealing with a chronic stressor over a long period of time, it's really important to kind of look out for ways that you can de-stress or fill up your own cup, which I'm sure we'll get into more, that's going to prevent you from hitting that point of exhaustion.
Yeah. And we brought it up, but I wanted to touch on the perceived stress. I think that that's really important. So I don't know if that's something that we should talk about now, or maybe a little bit later, kind of going into like, okay, well, I've established that I'm burnt out. Now what? Because I think that perceived stress kind of goes into a little bit of like mindset.
Yeah.
But as a counselor, as a school counselor, this is one of the lessons that I would do with my kiddos is the pouring into your own cup, and you're filling your own bucket, so to speak. And it's kind of this idea that you can pour into other people's cups or buckets, whatever analogy you want to use, and you can only pour so much until you have nothing left to give. And so eventually what you need to do is fill your own cup. And so that looks like taking care of your nutrition, that you're not eating fast food or processed food all the time, that you're eating good, whole nutritious food that's going to keep you energized and keep you feeling good physically throughout the day, whether that's self-care. So maybe taking, a mental health day, maybe just taking a day completely to yourself, or you sit down with a book, or maybe you tackle cleaning your house just to make you feel a little bit more refreshed. So all of those things, because you need to balance that input versus output. You can't give all the time without having something back in return. So I just think that that's really important, is to think about, while you are going to the gym, while you are balancing your goals and everything, that you need to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Otherwise, you will 100% experience burnout in some form or another.
Yeah. And I think one thing that's really important to touch on when it comes to pouring into your own cup, and I like to phrase this as supply and demand. So if you think of like the marketplace, or just, the balance of, if you think of a seesaw, supply and demand, and you want those things to balance out with each other, how nutrition and what your goals are can influence that, and influence, the rate at which you might hit exhaustion, or when you might hit burnout. So for example, if your supply is your nutrition, it's your self-care, it's how you're taking care of yourself, in the gym, outside the gym, mental health, like you were saying. And let's say someone's goal is to lose body fat, to diet, and to reduce calories and increase cardio and increase output. Those are types of external stress and demand that you're now additionally placing on yourself. So if someone is approaching burnout, or if they are already burnt out from what they're doing, but their goal is, they want to lose those 10 more pounds, or they want to lose those 5 more pounds, and they are just, hell-bent on continuing to diet. But the diet is putting additional demand on that person that they are no longer able to recover from, whether it's just low calories or extremely high cardio. We have to be able to look at that and say, okay, supply is nowhere near meeting demand right now. And maybe there's other life stressors that are also adding into that. So at what point does that balance and that trade-off, is that worth it? Because if you're not filling up your supply, and one of the reasons why we encourage raising calories, one of the reasons why we encourage reverse dieting and spending time at maintenance, is because we want supply to meet or be higher than demand most of the time, for you to be able to handle those other stressors that come into your life. Because ultimately, dieting and doing more work and cutting your calories more is only going to add to the demand that you're placing on yourself. And it's only going to make that seesaw tip one way versus the other. So that's kind of the way that I like to look at the pouring into your own cup analogy with that analogy.
Yeah, I love that. And again, I hate going back to women, but I feel like sometimes we view filling up our own cup as or maybe even just putting ourselves first and what we need is selfish. And we have a very difficult time reaching out to other people and saying, hey, I need help. I can't take care of the dishes and clean the house and meal prep and grocery shopping and also going to the gym and getting, laundry and my nutrition and this and that. It's hard sometimes to admit, like, I cannot do all of this myself. I need help so I can focus on myself a little bit more. And maybe even taking time off from the gym to ensure that you are taking care of all of those stressors in your life. And it's kind of the same thing. It's with mental health too, and with physical health is, in the gym, you need to take rest days. So the same thing with your mental health. Sometimes you just need to rest, heal, and recover. So you cannot give to everyone and expect to be able to continue to give without taking time off. So it's not selfish, because if you want to show up to be your best for other people, you need to make sure that you are at your best. So sometimes taking that time off is exactly what you need to show up as a better person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see this issue a lot in my clients that are mothers, because they take on that role of, I can't take any time away from my kids. I can't take any time away from the family. And, that will ultimately lead to some form of burnout if they're not taking care of themselves. And I really stress in those situations that 45 minutes to an hour that you're putting in at the gym or just in your home is ultimately giving you, that little bit of time away to really refresh and fill up your own cup. And we have to view it that way when it comes to family life. And especially that example of, mothers and new mothers, which I have a couple who are kind of struggling with this, especially when you have a toddler or you have an infant and they're very needy. Or maybe it's even a new puppy that you got over quarantine, right? Like,
yes.
And those are the types of things where it's like, you have to take that time for yourself and acknowledge, and it's very hard to acknowledge that, you might not be showing up at your best, like you said, if you don't do that. And 45 minutes to an hour away from your child or your puppy, and, letting your husband or your significant other take the load for that hour, 45 minutes, is going to be worth it. And it's not, you're not neglectful and you're not missing out on anything for that short period of time. So I could not agree more about that, especially on your point with women, because unfortunately it's just something that we see more prevalently in women, because I feel like the men that I work with don't have as much trouble just saying, hey, it's my time for the gym, here I go, no one can tell me no sort of mindset. And women just don't really have that as often, and it's something that we have to work on and cultivate.
Yeah, I agree. So I think this is a good segue to talk about, we've talked about what burnout is, what the symptoms look like, and the importance of taking time off, whether it's from the gym or from, just taking a mental health day. So maybe we'll talk about a little bit of what to do if you are feeling like you're burnt out from the gym or from your workout. So what are some things that someone could implement themselves?
Yeah, definitely some practical takeaways so that you guys listening can actually know how to apply this, right? Because we can say take time off from the gym all we want, but if we're not giving you guys, measurable things that you can do that would be sustainable but also productive for you, instead of just saying like, oh, you should quit fitness because you're burnt out. Like, that doesn't help. But yeah, definitely. So I'll start with the gym. If you are burnt out or doing too much at the gym, I would say probably the number one thing to do is take a look at your total, not just your gym total stress, but your total life stress, and take a look at your entire context. So, there's a difference, a big, big difference between someone who's a freshman or sophomore in college who has taken 3 or 4 classes, and maybe they have a part-time job, maybe they don't, but they have, 2-3 hours to putz around at the gym 6 days a week. And that's awesome. You should take advantage of that time if that's what you want to do with your time. But as soon as that, person in college graduates and they start their first full-time job, and maybe they meet someone who makes them really happy, your life is going to look completely different in that context versus the previous. And so oftentimes what I see happening with clients is I get someone who says, hey, I was training, 6 days per week for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And, I just graduated and I just started this new job, and like, it's just impossible. And I'm feeling so discouraged, and I'm feeling like, I've been trying to keep to that schedule lately, and I'm just feeling burnt out. The first thing that we're going to do with that person is scale them back, because when we're looking at, like I said at the beginning, total life stress, we're looking at your full context. All stress is cumulative. So it's not just like your training stress is completely separate from everything and your life stress is completely separate from everything, and they don't interact with each other.
They definitely do.
Ultimately, they all elicit the same response in your body, which is stress. And so when we're doing that, we have to make sure that your total overall stress and load on your body is something that you can recover from. And so if that means, you're working your 9 to 5, and maybe now you can only go to the gym 3 days per week, but you can do it consistently and you can recover from it and you can feel good doing it, then that's probably the next step that person's going to need to take.
I would also argue that would be way more beneficial 3 days a week than trying to stress and have all this anxiety about missing the gym when you're used to going 6 days a week. So I think a lot of people have this misconception that they need the absolute perfect fitness program, and they need to be doing that at 100%, 6-7 days a week. And again, like you said, if they're burnt out and then they're like, I can't do this anymore, and they give up and they don't go to the gym for 2, 3, 4, months, that is not beneficial because you're not being consistent. So if you know that you can get to the gym 2 or 3 times a week consistently for months on end, that is more sustainable. And that is going to be more helpful in the long term, even if it's a mediocre training program. It's the fact that you are making it there consistently each week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just the number of days add up, because 2-3 times per week for 52 weeks is going to be a much larger number than 60 days straight and then not doing anything for the rest of the year.
Right.
So yeah, definitely. And a lot of times less is more when it comes to managing cumulative stress. And so kind of looking at it holistically, when you're not able to recover from your training and you're trying to push past that threshold of what you actually can do and balance and feel good doing, you might just be digging yourself into a hole, rather than, training 2 or 3 times per week, feeling good doing it. Maybe your progress isn't as fast as it was when you were training 6 days a week, but this is your life now. This is your context now. And there's some acceptance that does have to go with that. And it's in big part about changing expectations. So, when someone is saying, I want to go to the gym 6 days per week and work my full-time job and have a social life and do all these other things,
that sounds good,
and they miss one day at the gym, and then they're like, oh my God, I'm a failure. What if we change the narrative and we say, I'm going to go to the gym twice, and if I get to the gym a 3rd time, then that's awesome, but I'm going to require myself to go twice, and I'm going to do all these other things while doing that. And they can check off those boxes every single week and feel like a success, and then feel like even more of a success if they're able to go more. That is, in my opinion, the most empowering piece, because I will tell you right now, there are very few clients that I start out with more than 4 days at the gym, depending on their life context. But most people, I start off with 3 days at the gym for 99% of the clients that I begin with, because that's a frequent enough time that they're going to see changes happen. But it's also not so frequent that they can miss 3 days in a row and still get all their workouts in for the week.
Exactly. Yeah, when I have clients come to me, one of the questions on their questionnaire is, how many times realistically do you think that you can make it to the gym? And if I have a client that says 5 or 6, I'm going to start off with probably 4, because I want to work up with that consistency and have them saying, you know what, hey, coach, I could probably do another workout this week. And so maybe what I'll do, kind of like you said, is work in a optional workout, like a bonus workout. So I still want you going 4, but here's a 5th. If you can make that work, that's awesome. And once they're doing that consistently, then yeah, maybe we'll add in a 5th or maybe even 6, probably not 6. But yeah, it's that we want you to be consistent and have you feeling successful, rather than saying, we want you going to the gym 6 or 7 times a week and you can't do that. And then you feel like a failure and you want to stop checking in with your coach because you feel like you're letting them down, or you're going to be a disappointment. So again, it's just changing the narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. And then too, there's going to be bad weeks. So maybe I have someone who starts with 3 days per week and they only get to the gym once on 1 week. And, they ultimately, they set up their expectations for 3, they hit 1, maybe they do feel like a failure, but bouncing back from that, going from 1 to 3, instead of going from, 1 day per week to 6, is so much more recoverable. So that's really important too. Another thing that I think is important if you're doing too much at the gym, or you're, overtraining and non-functionally overreaching, is probably focusing on one goal at a time. So a lot of times we will see people who have endurance goals and strength goals, and they want to lose body fat, and they want to grow their glutes, and they want to do all these things all at the same time. And ultimately, if you are focused on that many things at once, this part is probably going to be pretty short. You're not going to see progress doing all of those things at once. You're not going to see much measurable change in any of those areas because it's just too much of a demand. And so one of the things that I will focus on with someone is, let's pick one goal and figure out which one of these matters the most to you. We'll hone in on that for a good couple of months. And then from there, once we achieve that goal, we can switch gears and we can move on to the next, but we have to take it one at a time. And ultimately, it's those feelings of success, like you said, that empower sustainability. It's not just, is this, reasonable? Is this supply and demand? It's the mentality behind it. And if you are feeling successful with what you're doing and being able to see results with what you're doing is a part of that, then you're going to be able to sustain it more for the long term.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the other thing too, one of the things that I want to talk about is, if you're feeling burnt out from the gym and from working out, we talk about deloading and taking time off and really listening to your body, but also recognizing that there are different types of fitness activities that you can still do that is not completely taking a step back from the gym. So maybe you're feeling, like you don't enjoy the gym anymore or as much as you used to. So maybe instead of going to the gym, you do something else that brings you joy, in a sense that's still active. So maybe you spend more time taking your dog on a walk, or, you invite the whole family. And so you don't feel like you're spending an hour, 2 hours away from your family. Maybe you all decide to go do something together. And, maybe you used to dance in college. And so maybe instead of weightlifting for a week, you decide you want to do Zumba, or, yoga, something that's just active that you can do that is not the traditional weightlifting in the gym. And that's okay. And, implementing things like that, you're still prolonging your fitness journey, and you're still finding things that bring you joy. And it doesn't always have to be strength-based and weightlifting, that you can take time off to dabble in something else. And then something that you brought up earlier, Marissa, is maybe after a couple weeks of that, you're like dying to get back into the gym again. So recognizing that fitness isn't just a one-size-fit-all type thing, that it can be a lot of different things that you can implement and ultimately still bring you joy, and is a lifelong habit, I guess I want to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had this happen with a client who's kind of coming off from a layoff. She was dealing with some personal stressors, and she essentially, you know, we have this COVID pandemic going on. Some people just don't want to be going to the gym all that often.
Mm-hmm.
But I told her, coming back to making these habits and kind of practicing them, our first goal that we set was to do 3 active things sessions per week, and we didn't set a goal for get in all 3 programmed workouts at the gym. I had them written for her in case she wanted to go to the gym 3 times, and those were the 3 sessions that she wanted to do. But I told her, it can be a jog around the block, it can be a hike with your husband, it can be going and, I don't know, trying out boxing for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
It could be literally anything. But I said, go do 3 active things every single week. Get your heart rate up, get those endorphins flowing, because that is what is going to spark change and spark this habit process and the sustainability over the
Mm-hmm.
long term. Because ultimately, especially this person, she was coming off of kind of a couple of months of not really doing anything and kind of being in a really big funk.
Mm-hmm.
And we were kind of on and off with correspondence during that time. But, this has been probably the best way that we've approached it since we've kind of tried this out again. And I would highly recommend, like you said, figuring out something that's going to be exciting to you, that's going to motivate you to get out and get moving. And it doesn't have to be lifting weights. It doesn't have to be, pressing dumbbells. And ultimately there is, an ideal way to change your body composition and to build muscle, but those things are going to be there. You can
Mm-hmm.
always come back to them.
Right.
And it's not something that if you take a break from it for a couple of weeks, that all of your muscles are going to disintegrate. In fact, our muscle retention just with physical activity is pretty damn good. As long as you're kind of moving and using those muscles doing something, you'll have much better muscle retention than if you were to just sit on the couch for 3 weeks at a time. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're worried about losing muscle because you're not going to the gym, but you're burnt out from the gym, just stay active. And I promise you, when you step back and get to the weights, they will not, maybe they'll feel heavy the first week, but they will not be, very far off from where you had left off.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we did a pretty big, we covered, I feel like, the gym and weightlifting and taking time off and deloads, but going to a different topic, if you're feeling out from tracking food. So you and I, we've coached together, we have very similar coaching philosophies, and we're big proponents of tracking macros or flexible dieting. And you and I have absolutely both experienced this in the past, that even though flexible dieting is this idea that you can track your macros and eat pretty much whatever you want, if 80 to 90% of your food is whole nutritious foods, that the other 10, 20% can be kind of fun foods. That doesn't mean that you can always eat everything that you want every single day, because maybe one day I want a whole box of cereal. And sometimes that's just not feasible. That's not something that you can do. So sometimes you can get feelings of being burnt out, or you're still feeling restricted from tracking food. And so kind of going into that segue and talking to the next topic is, what do you do when you're feeling burnt out from the nutrition side of things?
Yeah, definitely. And usually what I tend to see with this is kind of a lack of acceptance. So to kind of, I guess, briefly summarize what that means is, if you weighed, let's say, 200 pounds, eating fast food, drive-through, and using all those old habits that maybe you have kicked for a while, and maybe you've gotten down to 150 pounds, maybe you have lost all of that weight by using flexible dieting and using that approach. Ultimately, what I mean by lack of acceptance is, when you get down to that weight maintenance will ultimately only occur if you continue those habits that you had implemented, right? And so one of the biggest problems we have in just America with weight loss and weight regain is a lack of acceptance of this is now my lifestyle and this is now how I make nutritional decisions. Because people will lose the weight and people don't have trouble losing weight. But as soon as they finish losing the weight, they want to go back.
Maintenance. It's that maintenance side of things.
Yeah, they want to go back to the old habits. But ultimately, maintenance still implies using most of those habits that they had. Of course, your calories are going to be a little bit higher than when you were dieting. Maybe you dieted on 1,500 calories, and maybe now you can maintain that new weight on 2,000 calories. And that's awesome. But is 2,000 calories going to provide you with all the drive-through trips that you want? Absolutely not. There's still some restriction there. And ultimately, weight maintenance does require some restriction. So I think one of the culprits of this is social media and painting the picture that, weight maintenance is this super flexible, beautiful, perfect thing where you can eat whatever you want and just maintain your weight because now you've gotten to where you want to be. But ultimately, what you're not seeing is behind the scenes, these people are still making some of those sacrifices and they're still doing what they need to do to keep themselves in an energy balanced state. So calories in versus calories out. If you are a smaller human, you're 150 pounds instead of 200, you are going to maintain your weight on a lower amount of food intake than you did when you were 200 pounds. And there has to be some amount of acceptance with that. And ultimately, it can get a little bit exhausting if you are being too restrictive and not allowing yourself some flexibility. But there's a couple of ways that we can approach, I guess, how to solve being burnt out from tracking food. But I would say that's usually the root cause is not having that acceptance of what maintenance really means for a lot of people, and not accepting that that's something that maybe this is a new lifestyle that we are still working on adopting.
Right. So having those, if I'm hearing you correctly, so clients have this expectation that they're going to go into this dieting phase, they're going to be tracking their macros, and then once the diet is over, they think, well, now I can go back to what I was doing before because I've lost all this weight. Not realizing that they still need to continue with those healthy habits like grocery shopping, meal prep, bringing, food with them, sometimes skipping out on happy hours. I think what happens with each individual is trying to find that balance. So trying to find that, still saying yes sometimes to happy hours and going out and maybe having a free meal or, you're not tracking anything, but then still having that discipline to not have fast food every single day, or making your own treat meals at home or making healthy versions of things. So, and that's going to look different for everyone, but kind of that acceptance that this is my new normal, or this is a lifestyle. These are the healthy habits that I've implemented that I'm going to continue to utilize throughout my life to ensure that I stay within my goals that I have for myself.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that. I was going to say new normal, because your normal before is just not going to cut it. If that's, what you want to do, then ultimately you have to accept the consequences that come with that. So if that's the lifestyle that you want to live, you want to go back to eating drive-through 5 times per week, you can do that, but you have to accept what comes with it if you're not going to make any trade-offs or sacrifices. Another problem that I see with burning out from tracking food is a misalignment in what you say your goals are versus what your actions are showing. And I see this a lot at the very end of a dieting phase. So, maybe that person hasn't quite reached where they want to be yet. And they're kind of spinning their wheels because they'll tell me, hey, it is my utmost priority that I lose these last 5 pounds or these last 10 pounds. And, I'm not going to be happy till I get there, yada, yada, yada. But then I look at their log, I look at their check-in, and there's 4 days that they forgot to track on MyFitnessPal, and there's 2 missed workouts out of 3. And I ask them, okay, well, if it happens 1 week and it was just a bad week, we try to reset, we try to, go after it again. because if they tell me it matters, then I believe them. It matters, right? But if it happens for 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time, and we are just now, basically skipping out on tracking their food, more days than not, and they're just kind of, getting lazy with it, their weight's kind of trickling up because they're not being adherent anymore, then, their actions are showing me that fat loss is no longer what they want. Clearly, they are craving some sort of flexibility. They're craving maintenance, or, they're craving the freedom of not having to be as restricted. And so when it comes to that, I'll tell that person, look, I hear what you're saying. I hear that this is important to you, but maybe we need to spend some time at maintenance first. Learn how to be flexible in a way that's not going to make you gain the weight back, and then revisit those last 5 pounds later. So a lot of times it has to do with someone not acknowledging that, maybe their priorities have shifted. And if they're not showing me that their goals matter, and, this is in the absence of, other life stressors kind of getting in the way, or, sometimes you have a loss in the family, or you lose a loved one, or some other traumatic thing happens that make things go off the rails. That's obviously independent of this. But in general, if most things are going fine in your life and this all of a sudden starts to happen, usually it just means this is really no longer a priority to you, and that's what your actions are showing me. And it really doesn't have much to do with, I get the phrase a lot, oh, I just feel like tracking isn't for me, or I just feel like, maybe I would do better if I wasn't tracking. And usually it's not an issue of that. It's an issue of feeling too restricted that they give up on it altogether. So making that shift into higher calories and into maintenance can oftentimes solve the problem of being burnt out from tracking food.
I think another thing, and from my experience with clients, is feeling burnt out from food is because they have this misconception that they either need to be super clean and they need to be eating the traditional bro meals, so chicken, broccoli, rice, all of, tilapia and asparagus, and they don't fit in fun foods. And, for whatever reason, maybe they think that it's, going to make them gain weight or something that they shouldn't be eating. They have this restrictive belief about certain foods, so they don't eat anything. But then on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or whenever they get the first opportunity to eat that food, they go all out. And they either binge on the food or they have too many servings, and so they feel guilty. And so on Monday, they're like, okay, no sugar, no alcohol, no this, no that. And it kind of builds into that restrictive mindset of things. And that's why we like to utilize flexible dieting, because it's like, hey, if you love ice cream and you can fit in a serving every single night, I would rather you do that than binge and have an entire pint or gallon, not a pint, a half gallon on the weekends. And so it's fitting into those fun foods. Or instead of the chicken, broccoli, and rice, maybe you love quesadillas, and maybe you can actually find something with those same macro breakdowns. So trying to implement foods that you like and foods that you enjoy, I think, is going to make your diet that much more sustainable in the long term. Because the ideology that I have with food and everything really in general is, if you can't see yourself doing this within the next 6 months, 6 years, then you're probably not going to be able to sustain it long term. So it's those healthy habits. And so finding ways that you can make things feel less diety and less restrictive. And so I think that that's really important, that you're enjoying the foods that you eat, and you are not having to be 100% strict all the time. And kind of what going into back to the fitness thing too, it's, each week and sometimes even months and years are going to look different. But at the end of the day, you want to think that you were able to give it your 100%. And that 100% may look different than next week because of whatever stressors you have going on in your life. So it's okay if 1 week, you need to take a little break from tracking macros, or you weren't able to track as diligently as before. But kind of that progress, not perfection, that every week that you're building off of those skills and what you've learned, and you're able to make things kind of better for the next week. Or if you weren't perfect, it's like, okay, well, what can we do? What were the positives? You know, you were able to maybe have some prepped food in the fridge, and that made you not go grab fast food on Monday. So maybe that's a skill that we implement from here on out, is that you just have a little bit of prep food, or maybe some frozen prep meals that you can just bring out and reheat. So just trying to find ways that make things easier and more sustainable in the long run.
Yeah. And one thing that you said too that really stuck out to me that I do with clients oftentimes is, you know, maybe that person is feeling like I can't track as strictly as I was once before. Then I will say, okay, let's run with that. Let's, you know, instead of weighing out everything that you eat to each gram, let's start transitioning to just weighing out your proteins and your heavy fat sources, or those really dense foods. But when it comes to vegetables, grab a handful, track a cup. Like, don't think too hard into it, but let's start practicing, you know, using those eyeballing skills that we are building with weighing out our food in the first place. And I'll have clients do this on a spectrum. So, depending on where they are in their journey, ultimately my goal for a lot of my clients, if they express that this is what they want, is using tracking macros as a tool, but then eventually getting them to a place where they can eat the same way essentially without using an app or a food scale. And
Definitely.
so they might start with just, you know, not weighing their veggies on a scale. But then maybe I tell them, okay, I want you to take one day where you don't track on MyFitnessPal, but you still use your food scale and you like use the same portions. And I want this to kind of just all be, you know, eating your normal foods at home, but practicing that. Oops. Eating all your normal foods at home, but practicing that. And another thing that I will have them do is the reverse of that. So maybe they will plug everything into MyFitnessPal, but they won't use a food scale all day. And we kind of take those progressive steps, and then eventually I'll tell them, okay, one of these days this week, you know, pick a day, Monday through Thursday, and I want you to not use the app or use your food scale, but I want you to just go through a normal day, and I want you to see how you do with that. And then eventually maybe we get to a place where they're tracking 6 days per week instead of 7, then maybe 5, then 4. And then they are just sustaining this routine over the long term without using any of those tools. And maybe they do use their food scale once in a while just because they want to verify that they're still eyeballing things well, which is great, right? It's a tool that we can use because we don't have to use MyFitnessPal and a food scale forever. And once we put them away, we don't have to put them away forever either. We can always use those tools and keep putting them away or bringing them back as needed.
Yeah, and you made a really good point about different phases. And tracking macros ultimately is a tool. And so for me personally, I don't want to be 70 and tracking macros. Like that's just not something that I want to do and would enjoy. But currently now I'm in a dieting phase, and I'm in contest prep. So I have very important and very intense goals. So in order to reach those goals, I know that I need to utilize tracking macros, and I need to be 100% on point. Otherwise, I'm not going to reach my goals. But if I am in a off season and my goal isn't to lose weight and it's just maybe to maintain, well, then I can probably pull back on tracking because it's not a skill that I need to be utilizing at the moment. And I can switch to more intuitive eating, and maybe my weight fluctuates a little bit here or there, but my ultimate goal is maintenance. So I don't need to be tracking macros and be 100% adherent all the time. So it really just depends on the phase that you're in and what goals that you have. And, if you just want to go out and enjoy life at the moment, then probably tracking macros 7 days a week is not going to be what you find to be the most enjoyable in that moment.
Yeah. And ultimately, like if you try to drag out tracking macros beyond what you need it for, then that's when kind of burnout occurs, right? Because
yeah, definitely.
you're trying to track macros, but your goals don't align with it. And, you just find yourself skipping out on it anyways. And you just feel like a failure at the end of the week when you check in.
Right.
Let's evaluate that. Maybe we shouldn't have you tracking macros on the weekend, and maybe we should have you practicing habits and practicing, proper portion sizes on the weekends instead, so that you can still maintain those results. But, maybe now you can get a mental break, and maybe you can prevent that burnout and be better Monday through Friday because you had Saturday and Sunday off, but not so off that you feel remorse or regret going into the next week.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. So to kind of wrap this up, we just wanted to finish this episode with some applications for you guys. So we talked about how to take time off from the gym, or scale back on the gym. We talked about strategies and ways that you can think about scaling back with tracking macros if you're feeling burnt out from tracking your food, or burnt out from dieting in general. Maybe the solution is just stop dieting. But let's talk about other applications of how we can reduce that holistic load on ourselves and prevent burnout, not just in the gym and with nutrition, but in life in general.
So you talked about stress being very holistic in the accumulation of everything. So other things to look out that might be contributing to the burnout or contributing to high levels of stress is taking a look at your sleep. So if you are only getting 4, 5, 6 hours of sleep at night, that is not adequate time to rest and recover. And not only that, but if you, I forget what study it is, but even if you get an hour less of sleep at night than normal, you are probably going to experience higher levels of fatigue, higher levels of hunger, higher levels of irritability, and all of those things contribute, again, to every aspect of your life. So it's extremely important that you're getting enough sleep each and every single night. The other thing to look at is maybe too much caffeine. If you have a really high caffeine tolerance, you're probably taking in more than 400, 500 milligrams a day. That might be a good indicator that it's time to scale back.
That can also impact your sleep too, because if you're taking tons of caffeine and you're getting poor sleep quality, those two things interact very tightly with each other. So if you cut back on caffeine, you might, start sleeping better, and maybe then you won't need as much caffeine.
Or looking at the timing of your caffeine. So I know that some people are very caffeine sensitive, and if they have anything after 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they are not going to be able to fall asleep to save their life. So looking at the timing of those things. And another thing that we've touched on earlier was your work life and looking at those stressors. And, if you have a toxic work environment or you have a boss who is putting a lot of stress and demands on you, if there's anything that you can do to bring your work life stress levels down. So maybe that's asking if you can work from home 1 day a week. I know, especially now with COVID, that is generally more accepted. And so maybe you fight to do something like that. Taking a look at your personal life, friends and family. If you have a family member who's not supportive of your goals or your lifestyle, and you come over for family dinners and they're like, what's a bite of this, or just have a drink, or oh, you're no fun that you don't drink anymore. So just maybe you spend a little bit less time with that person while you have these very important goals, or you look to make other friends who have those same goals as you. Maybe looking at finances. If you're having financial stress, maybe you grab a coffee every single morning. So maybe you eliminate something like that. Or maybe it's your daily routine. If you wake up 30 minutes earlier, you're able to sit and enjoy your coffee at home and not at Starbucks. Save some money. You are less stressed getting to work because you're going to be on time. Maybe you have a morning routine that you like to implement to set your mind right, set your intentions and your gratitude for the day. I don't know, so maybe spend less time on your phone. Just all of those things really add up to the amount of stress that you experience just day to day.
Yeah. And not just, like we said, training and nutrition does not exist in a bubble. These things all interact with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, one thing that taking control of your training and nutrition can really teach you is how much control you actually have over your life and how much control you have over your stress, but not only your stress, but how you respond to it. So, for example, one thing that you said that stuck out to me was your daily routine. So maybe you switch from ordering out at Starbucks every single morning to, you know, making your own coffee at home. And that not only saves you time, but it allows you the realization that you don't have to depend on the length of a Starbucks line to see if you're going to be early or late to work. Maybe you can just do that at home and control your outcome and be more reliable in the workplace. And all of these things kind of trickle into each other. So when you're looking at stressors, don't just look at each one in a bubble. Acknowledge that they all kind of mesh together and work with each other. And, you know, if you don't have a coach and you haven't worked with either of us, then you don't know that, you know, maybe we look at these things like sleep and personal life and quality of life and how these things are all impacting each other as well as your progress, but ultimately know that all of these factors do impact not only your quality of life, but maybe the results you're seeing too with what you're trying to do with your fitness and your nutrition. So when it comes to analyzing these stressors, oftentimes I find that people tend to overlook them or just deem them as non-important compared to other things. And they're not valuing their own sense of control or sense of self to actually take control over these things. But ultimately, when it comes to stress and burnout, we have a lot of control over it. So if you guys are feeling this way, I think the first step is really just acknowledging that you do have some control over it, if not a lot of control over what's going on and how you're feeling and how to change that.
So I had two thoughts when you were going over that. The first one is, again, the reason we talk about sleep, caffeine, you know, your personal life, your finances, your environment, all of those things impact your day-to-day. But as coaches, that's something that we want information on. If you have a coach who all they talk about is your training and nutrition, or here are your macros, see you next week, they are not taking a larger view at your week. And as a coach, I don't want a client who just says, hey, coach, here are my macros, here are my pictures, thanks. I want to know about your sleep. I want to know how much caffeine. I want to know what went on in your life. I love when I get paragraphs of information because that's just more information I have, more biofeedback, and that allows me to make a better decision on how I want to change your protocols for the week. And so all of those things are really important. So if you are looking for a coach, I would, you know, and they don't talk to you about those things, I would maybe reconsider and find someone who really cares about all of that stuff because it is extremely important. And then the second thing I had is something that I had brought up earlier, which is stress perception. And Lauren Conlin talks about this in one of her Science Simplified videos. And I absolutely love it because she takes studies and then she talks about the practical kind of takeaways and what you can do to implement things in your life. So stress perception is basically how an individual responds to stress. And so using the analogy or the example that Marissa brought up earlier is, you know, you have a huge midterm, you have a big test to study for. And so a person who has high stress perception, or maybe I'm not saying it correctly, but you have someone who perceives the test as extremely high stress, and they're like, oh my God, I'm going to fail. What am I going to do? Like now I don't have time to go to the gym and I can't track my macros and, you know, and it just wrecks them.
They're very
and then
reactive.
You have, yes, they're very reactive to the stress and they let the stress kind of consume them. And then you have another individual who's like, okay, I have a midterm, you know, maybe they're a freshman. They're like, I am a freshman. This is my first midterm. But, you know, if I'm going to be a senior in college, well, then I'm going to have a lot more midterms. So I need to find a way to study, to learn how to be a better student in the future. And what if I fail, then I fail.
but, you know, I learned that this way of studying didn't work for me, and so I'm going to build from there. Or, you know, I know that I'm a capable individual, and if I just set my mind to it and I implement all the strategies that I learned in high school, like study groups and flashcards, and I just need to really buckle down, and it's okay if my training and nutrition take a back seat because this is really important to me right now. So they just have a very different way of dealing with the exact same stressors. So someone who has that belief that they are capable of working through whatever stressor it is, they're going to have a lot less anxiety and stress overall. And so I think that that's really important and really shows you how powerful your mind is, and how just believing that you have control over the situation, how big of a difference and an impact that can make in your life.
Yeah, otherwise termed as self-efficacy. So
yes,
the control that you have over how you attribute stress, essentially. And I love that, because I think a majority of the clients that I do work with are high reactors. And a big part of the process is learning to compartmentalize and learning to kind of calm yourself down in the moment and say, okay, just because this is happening doesn't mean I need to throw everything and anything out the window. I still have control over these things. And in fact, if I take control over my training and my nutrition, I'll actually be more productive throughout the rest of the day. Or if I use my training at 5 p.m. as a way to look forward to that and push through my workday and study harder while I am, you know, sitting here, 9 to 5, whether it's schoolwork or whatever deadline you have that you're stressed about. If you look forward to your training session throughout the day, that's a way to kind of push yourself to get through it too. And so you can view your training and your nutrition as something that's additional stress, that's negative, or you can view your training and your nutrition, which you should, as a way to augment further control and further progress over the week with everything that you're doing. Because ultimately, exercise, there has been so much research talking about how it's neuroprotective, how it's going to make you more productive, how it helps you with just better prioritizing things in your life. Exercise truly is just kind of this key to learning how to control your outcomes, learning how to be a better and more productive individual. But it does require prioritizing your routine in order to do that. And same thing with proper nutrition. You're taking care of your nutrition, you're eating nutrient-dense foods, your brain is running off of better sources of things, and ultimately you're going to be able to perform better with work, with school, and with your training with better nutrition. So yeah, it takes a little bit of work and effort on the front end to make that happen, to plan it out, to have meals prepped, to make it to the gym, to pack your gym bag the night before. But ultimately, if you're able to appraise that stress and say, okay, this is what's happening, I need to rearrange things, and I need to make sure that my training and my nutrition is still a priority in this stressful situation, then, you know, I'm gonna come out the other end better than if I had just thrown everything out the window and everything went to shambles as soon as this stressor came into my life.
Wow, I think that's a good place to end the podcast. I don't think I have really anything else to add, but yeah, just training and nutrition. I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is consistency. Finding what works for you is ultimately going to make you a better individual overall.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast, and we'd appreciate it if you could leave a rating and review. And you can find both of us on Instagram. So you can find me at Christy Lynn Fit and Marissa at Marissa Ray Fitness. And thank you for listening. We hope to see you back next week.
Alrighty.
Bye.